that others may live. That is the motto U.S. Air Force Pararescue Jumpers live for, train for, and sometimes die for.
Gunshot wound to his left chest.
Part combat soldier, part doctor. There are no timeouts in a profession that measures success by living or dying. When pararescue students learn the skills to become a combat medic, the blood is fake, but the lessons of life and death are not. This program is about the pararescue training course known as the Pipeline.
Go ahead, because you're already doing it! You're quit!
Some will succeed, most will fail. There is only one rule for success: never quit.
I couldn't hear anything.
Where's he at, sir?
At the Pararescue Training School at Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico, 26 Air Force students are learning to become combat medics. This training is part of the 6-month-long paramedic program required to become a pararescue jumper.
We're gonna get you out of here, okay, Chris? Just keep breathing for me, all right?
These guys are going to be in the middle of a battlefield where there's going to be gunfire and there's going to be a lot of stressors that are going on.
If you get out there and you see that somebody's shot in front of you, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to be nervous? Are you going to be freaking out? Because if you're going to start freaking out, you're going to forget what you know. And then you become a nuisance to not only yourself, but also to your patient.
Pararescue jumpers are among the most highly qualified search and rescue medical teams in the world. Trained extensively in medical trauma care, PJs are employed in combat search and rescue situations and often in non-military emergencies as well.
Well, I think that's what really sets the pararescue apart, is the fact that the primary objective is to make sure that we can bring back every airman possible who's been either disabled in combat, hurt, captured, or whatever, to be able to treat that person with a medical injury.
All PJs undergo a 2-year training course called the Pipeline. The Pipeline prepares them for the various combat and medical scenarios encountered during search and rescue operations.
We're in the armed forces, which is the business of war. War is taking lives and saving lives. We just happen to be medics that focus on saving lives.
Some of the toughest training in the paramedic program is trauma lanes, simulated injury scenarios modeled after medical emergency situations. Here, a student must perform life-saving procedures under conditions intended to confuse and distract him.
Trauma lanes is 6 days of simulated trauma. You have simulated patients who have life threats that, if not corrected, they will die.
What we're looking for initially is, number one, can they handle the stress of the outside world? And that's why we utilize sirens, that's why we utilize other patients talking to them, why we have patients that are combative. It's how does he handle the entire scene? Does he do well with other people around him?
At each trauma lane, students must perform a medical assessment checklist under a strict time limit. The assessment is intended to first identify and treat immediate life threats to the patient, then address any lesser injuries that require care. The ultimate goal is teaching students to adapt the checklist to the needs of the patient. The assessments are broken down into 3 steps.
You do the initial, which gives you an overview of what your life threats are, and you address those life threats. And then you go through your rapid assessment, and that gives you a little better level of detail on what injuries the patient has, and that allows you to prioritize how quickly you need to transport this person or whether you can stay and play and treat the person on scene.
Each assessment checklist is broken down into specific skill elements and expected steps. Students must memorize this checklist, then learn to adapt it to whatever emergency situation they might encounter. Ultimately, the student must stabilize his patient for transportation back to a medical center.
These guys absolutely have to understand what is going to kill this patient versus, well, I need to do this because it says so right here in this checklist.
The checklist is nothing more than a guide as to how you're going to assess the patient and what questions you're going to ask. And you can't follow it each time because each patient's going to be different.
On each assessment, every student is required to demonstrate basic paramedic skills, inserting an IV, performing an intubation to clear a person's air passage, and applying splints. The blood is fake, but the tension is real. A student's failure during trauma lanes could end his chances of ever becoming a pararescueman.
We're going for the jugular. We want to see how they respond to outside stressors. They shouldn't feel any comfort at any point in the trauma lanes. We want them to feel scared.
Hurry up, we gotta help this guy. Let's get him out of here. We gotta go, Walsh. We got no time for this.
We want to see how they react to stress, because those who can't handle the stress well, this isn't a career field that's suitable for them.
The 28 students beginning trauma lanes have survived months of challenges presented by the pipeline.
What is your problem?
I remember now.
Yeah, you better remember. You're gonna be out here all night.
But they are learning quickly that the PJ paramedic program will be as tough as anything they have gone through so far.
1, 2, 3, up.
Most of these guys obviously are 18, 19 years old, straight out of high school. They have absolutely no medical training whatsoever. In order to be a paramedic, most civilian schools are anywhere from a year to a year and a half. We're doing it in 6 months.
The shock of increasing the blood pressure too fast breaks up the clots and causes hemorrhages to start hemorrhaging again. And it's called washout.
It was a wake-up call. It took me from being, all right, I'm a badass, and then you get to the medical portion and they slap you in the face with these books and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to learn, there's so much more I have to do. I'm not there yet.
This is one of the hardest things that they'll ever have to do in this pipeline, is getting through this medical portion, to be continuously tested out on knowledge and skills and to perform at a high level. It's not something that people can come in and take it lightly.
Lateral rise and fall. Direct somebody to stabilize the extremity, you do everything else.
For men used to facing physical challenge, the paramedic program is a complete change of emphasis. Study habits replace push-ups, as academics can require a student to read over 100 pages a night.
You can make it through all the other courses by just gritting your teeth and bearing all the pain and the pressure. But this course, it's a different kind of pressure because it's mental.
This is 6 months long. You know, you don't have the physical aspect, but your brain is absolutely drained day in and day out.
The amount of studying that you have to do in the paramedic course is by far more studying than I've ever had to do in college. We're going through textbooks in 2 days, 3 days, and taking tests on them.
And they're not kidding when they say that you have to study and you have to put your life into it. If you're not willing to give up things and sacrifice, you're not going to make it. So you kind of have to take a step back and look at yourself and look at the program and say, hey, do I still want to be here? Because this is still going to be a long road.
Don't touch that.
Memorizing procedures is one thing, applying them is another. When students Houghton and Cruz encounter two patients, one on top of the other, they attempt to begin treatment without coordinating their assessment for each patient's injuries.
You're taking too long. This initial assessment needs to be done. So when the student came in, they had two people lying on top of each other, essentially with pretty significant spinal injuries. So the two operators that came in and were fighting over who needed to take care of what and what needed to happen.
Even a seemingly straightforward emergency scenario is never what it seems. By not seeing the situation accurately and agreeing on a common course of action, Houghton and Cruz are now working against each other.
Get your assessment, be a leader, and get your other guys to do these things. This was a big problem in the World Trade Center, was the fact that firemen would come in and they were fighting with each other on what needed to happen. So I wanted to purposely put them in that situation so that they can realize the right thing to do.
Sergeant Miller is waiting for one or the other of the students to take control of the situation. But Cruz and Houghton remain fixated on treating their own patients.
There was 2 patients and another team working, so you had 8 guys working in a 4x4 area that was really causing problems, and
I don't think we had ever experienced something quite like that. It was real questionable on who was higher priority.
You've got different distractors, you've got blood squirting all over the place. You get confused sometimes. You definitely sometimes draw a blank.
What you had to learn from that was that the 2 lead medics there needed to talk to each other and figure out who was the priority and get that individual moved first.
Cruz remains distracted by his patient's hand caught in the fan and is slow to assess his patient's other injuries. In a real emergency situation, a failure to prioritize and treat the more serious injuries could kill a patient.
Get the spine board ready, make sure real quick.
All right, everybody stop. What's going on here? How are you going to move? Who is the most priority and who needs to maintain spinal precautions more than the other?
I do, because my guy's complaining he can't feel his legs.
Okay.
This guy can't feel his legs.
You guys are both talking to me instead of talking to each other. You're two paramedics on the street that are going to be fighting each other. Which one do you think is a higher priority?
This guy.
Okay, so you need to make sure that this guy moves first, and then after that, then you can move your guy.
Roger that,
All right? Go!
By failing to correctly prioritize his patient's injuries, Cruz attracts the attention of Instructor Miller.
When he first came in, he should have immediately went to take care of his airway, breathing, circulation, and he did not do that. What are you going to do for him right now? When I corrected him on that, he realized he was wrong. And then from then, with me constantly badgering him to hurry up and get that done, he was just behind before he even started. Your focus shouldn't be on intubation. Your focus should be saving this guy's life. Once you get caught behind the power curve on that kind of situation, you're definitely going to be falling apart for the rest of the call. What else is wrong with your patient? Tell me everything that is wrong with this guy right now.
Everything that's wrong with him. His hand's caught in a fan.
This fan is a distractor, okay? It looks cool, it's Hollywood, but is this going to kill him?
No.
It's not.
Unless
kill
it's
him?
bleeding, then it's no.
Is he bleeding?
This guy's strapped in. Is ambulance out here, or are we going?
Negative. You missed it. You have to wait.
As the situation becomes more critical, Cruz' team loses focus. Hesitation creates lethargy. Cruz seems to withdraw. His silence is deafening.
Whenever you have somebody that's in charge, doesn't appear to be in charge, the rest of the guys start second-guessing him. That's what happened with Cruz' team. They all just kind of sat there and they didn't do anything. Cruz wouldn't say anything. We went through a couple minutes of just absolutely no talk. It's a bad sign. There should be something going on at all times.
This guy's gonna die in front of you. You're not gonna be able to save him because you're taking too long.
Tomorrow is another trauma lane, more complicated, more stressful than today's. Cruz and Houghton must learn from their mistakes, or the instructors will make them pay. The pararescue pipeline is designed to constantly push students to their mental and emotional limits. If a man can't handle the stress during trauma lane simulations, instructors believe he will fail during the pressure of a real-world operation.
Suction it out.
We offer wartime contingencies so that the students have a good opportunity to see what it's really like out in the real world. Realistically, at trauma lanes, we have a good idea of who's going to make it in our program, who's not going to make it.
The pressure of passing and failing is nothing new for the 28 students in class. For first-time medical students, like Sergeant Glass, who has never failed anything during his entire pipeline training, the pressure of the paramedic program is secondary to the pressure he puts on himself.
Sure, I might have had to redo mask and snorkel a couple times and things like that, but I've never had to redo an evaluation or a test. And the pressure was really on me because, you know, I want to get through every course in this pipeline first time, every time.
Okay, I see arterial blood Hodge. I need you to put direct pressure right here on his, try to stop his bleeding.
Francis is another first-time paramedic student. He's learning complicated procedures at such a rapid pace, it's proving difficult.
Let me see your mouth real quick.
The trauma lanes bring him face to face with the essential nature of pararescue. It's a medical profession first and foremost.
I remember thinking, this is maybe what it's going to be like, and you know, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be able to come through?
Almost nobody passes every pipeline evaluation test the first time. If a student fails, he will retest. If he fails again, he will be set back to repeat that course. Those who are set back are called washbacks.
The realism of trauma lane is what's probably the hardest thing about it. We have a high washout rate at our trauma lanes. They're being tested. They're trying to figure out, am I good enough to do this job?
Two students, Brown and Houghton, are washbacks from earlier paramedic classes. Although doing well on their second try, they know this is their last chance to get through paramedic training.
You know, I'd been to college and graduated, got a degree, and I thought studying for an Air Force exam was going to be pretty easy. You can pass it with flying colors. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. Being set back, my back's against the wall. If I were to make a mental error and not study for tests or do something stupid, then that's it for me.
While there are many reasons students fail paramedic training, not studying is the most common. Many times, students neglect to understand the level of commitment required in a career field where service is a lifestyle, not a job.
If we have somebody that's less than, say, 25 years of age, we're definitely worried about it. We're worried about the party factor, and students will tell you that themselves.
I decided to, instead of study that weekend, go snowboarding because we had quite a bit of snow that week. Came back, took the test, failed it, tried to cram with my buddies, and they did what they could to help me through, and ended up not passing the test a second time, so they sent me back.
Houghton is determined not to fail again. His snowboard hangs on the wall wrapped in plastic, his daily reminder that the mission comes first.
It takes studying to get through this course. That's what I learned.
Along with study comes performance of basic EMT skills under strict time limits. Inserting an IV, called making the stick, inserting a tube into the airway, called an intubation, and applying various splints. To increase student proficiency, instructors developed the speed drills.
Ready? Go. Everybody, what's going on?
We were noticing that in trauma lanes, the little things were being ignored, such as doing a simple splint. So we decided to start doing speed drills to help them out, to do the little basic things of being a paramedic or being a medic in general.
The speed drills actually got you more proficient and got you working at a quicker rate. And it just got your hands going in the motion the right way, and it got you thinking in the right manner at a quick speed, which is what's going to happen when you get out in the street.
The fog and the confusion, their brain is functioning as fast as it can, and we're trying to get them into a little bit of a muscle memory, so hopefully the hands won't forget what they should be doing.
Nowhere is the speed drill more crucial than on an IV stick, the insertion of a catheter into a vein to introduce fluids.
I told him that too.
Because students can attempt live IV sticks only under an instructor's supervision, they are limited to 1 or 2 attempts per day. On test days, students get 3 attempts to make a successful stick, or they fail.
The operator was trying to stick me twice. Didn't end up getting the IV. And I think I got 17 total right now on me.
The reason that we offer 3 IV sticks in trauma lanes is we need them to be proficient, and then we need them to understand the severity of what they're doing. The trauma lane patients, if they require an IV, they require it because it's life-threatening. If they don't get the IV, then the attempts mean nothing, because ultimately the patient's going to die.
The next trauma lane scenario is a simulated terrorist bombing. To add realism to every lane, other PJ trainees act as injured victims using special effects makeup called moulage. The use of moulage and fake blood is not gratuitous. Instructors want as much realism as training will allow.
Break your artery.
Those things be bleeding.
We get the patient to act as a real patient would. We give him outside stressors that would go along with that scenario. We would hate for them to go out and suddenly face a challenge in the real world that they haven't had a chance to address here in training.
Going into the building, the student's vision is impaired by smoke and darkness. Locating the patient becomes difficult. Once on the scene, they must operate by feel. For Sergeant Glass, who is the assistant class leader, he enters the smoky building without any apprehension.
Let's get an NRB on him, 50 liters per minute, high flow O2. Hey buddy, I'm Brian, I'm with EMS service. Can I help you out? What's your name?
I remember going in there once and not being able to find my patient. We came upon this mannequin, and I wasn't sure if this was like part of my training just to see, you know, if they were testing me. So I leaned down and I checked the mannequin's pulse, and I look over at my buddy and I say, "This guy's got no pulse, he's dead, let's get out of here." And then one of the instructors was like, "No, that wasn't the patient, he's a little further down."
In the real world, patient information often is unreliable or non-existent. Glass believes that reacting to the situation is a key for success.
By the time we got to the patient, it was so dark. We were doing everything on feel. I was just sweating all over myself, probably sweating all over the patient, but it was a burn patient. I think he had like 75% burn. Also got the IV stick in the dark, pulled him out, gave my report to Sergeant Thomas.
As Glass gives his report to Sergeant Thomas, all the instructors are pleased with his performance in the trauma lane so far. Glass is on track to pass his final exams. He's making it look easy.
On your count, Hosh. I'm a blind doctor. Lightly. Good to go. Right here, Sunglass. I'm blind. I can't see a thing.
Got a 20-year-old male, white, 54% burns. Found the patient conscious.
Where are the burns?
Patient, there's burns to the right, whole leg, upper and lower chest,
upper and lower back.
Okay.
And the patient's right arm.
Okay.
Completely 2nd degree and 3rd degree burns.
Okay.
Patient went unresponsive. We intubated him. Initiated 500 cc bolus. Had a second line ready to go.
Why'd you start an IV?
Started an IV because the patient's systolic BP was at 80.
Okay.
We want to try to get him up to 90 so we can titrate.
That'd be important to know.
Glass really brings a lot to the table when he comes to school. He's really good with his patients. His book knowledge is superb. Physical standards, from what I understand, are really, really good for him. When he comes to work and does a really good job with it.
But Francis is having trouble. One instructor describes his actions as a day late and $1 short. Francis can't seem to adapt the basics he's learned to each new situation and appears stymied by each new mistake.
As we get closer to our evaluations, there need to be far less mistakes. And so if I mess up today, that means I got 2 days to deal with the fact that, I stunk it up or whatever, and I have to wait till Monday to redeem myself.
Francis is among the students identified by instructors as needing extra work. They arrange for him to perform extra trauma lane assessments before the final exam.
Okay.
If someone demonstrates a shortfall or a weakness, the reason we're here is that we identify it and we work on it. We're here to strengthen them and not just to cut them away.
Giving Francis extra work is intended to boost his confidence, but he continues to have problems with his assessments and EMT basics. Francis seems unsure of his decisions and loses concentration when the instructor asks him simple questions.
Oh, nice. He just pulled it out of his arm. Look at it.
Reassess your sight.
You want me to DC this, Sergeant?
Yeah. Strike 2, press on with your assessment.
If I ask him a question or want him to justify one of his treatments, he can't stop and look at me and talk to me and take that time off because I'm not taking him off the clock. Stop, Francis. It's 30 minutes. It's time.
I got a guy sitting there. He's giving me his arm. He's got good veins, and for some reason, I just not getting the stick right now.
I tried and I tried and I tried, and I don't know what I was doing wrong, but I couldn't get it done.
We have a book that we just continuously write in every day on their performance.
All right, guys,
now, if I pick up a book that has 3 or 4 entries in it that says that Airman Francis is continuously slow, then I'm going to sit there and I'm going to repeatedly go after what his weaknesses are to see if he can make it.
At this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assess his leg as soon as I get this bandage secure.
Having to know where everything was and to deal with the different things the instructor was telling you about your patient and being able to process that while moving your hands, talking to your patients, that was the hardest thing for me to get.
If he doesn't progress, we'll find that out next week. On test day, we'll evaluate him. And if he doesn't meet our standards, then he's going to get set back.
The next trauma lane will be the hardest yet. Night trauma lanes will force students to perform their entire assessment and EMT procedures in the dark. With the final evaluations only days away, a setback now would mean starting over. This is not a time for any man to falter. By day 6, it's time for night lanes, the toughest trauma lane yet. The medical procedures are unchanged. Each student must locate, treat, and prepare his patient for evacuation, all in the darkness, requiring each student to literally perform the checklist assessment by touch.
They now no longer have their sight that they have to depend on. They have to depend on what they can see, smell, hear, and it adds to the stress overall. And that's what we're looking for.
Night changes things. It changes your perspective as far as how far someone or something is away. And it also changes how you assess the patient because you can't see what's going on. You have to actually put your hands into it and find out what's going on with your fingers.
It gives you an appreciation for how difficult it's going to be once we get out into the world and we start doing our job in a combat environment.
Night lanes is a major challenge for most students, but Glass continues to thrive on the excitement.
How long has it been since you put that tourniquet on? What's your time limit for a tourniquet? 15 minutes, sir? 20 minutes. 20 minutes? His leg is lost. Move on.
I think most of us, we really thrive on that pressure and that stress, and that's what pretty much turned us onto this career field. So when you saw the blood squirting and heard the sirens going, it lets you know, hey, this is what I'm training for.
The noise and the chaos in the darkness magnify the medical problems and hinder team leaders who cannot communicate with their assistants. Under the noise and lack of visibility, simply locating the patient is an ordeal.
Walked in on the scene, couldn't find my patient. I seen a hand. I'm looking around, and I was a little confused at first as to what I was going to do in that situation. With everything going on, the smoke, the noise, the yelling, the darkness, it was kind of tough. It was a lot tougher than just being out here in the daylight, having a patient laying there unresponsive.
Walsh begins to assess his patient using the checklist, but the lack of visibility and the incessant noise quickly compound his difficulties.
It was sensory overload. I just had a lot of things going on. The patient had a lot of injuries. I just kept on trying to manage his life threats, but then it seemed like something else would happen.
Walsh gets his patient stabilized and moves him into a passenger van intended to simulate the crowded interior of a helicopter.
We got no time to move, we gotta move, let's go! You in one high, Walsh, you in one high, roger that?
He now must insert an IV into the patient's arm while the van bumps and bounces, simulating the actions of a helicopter evading enemy fire.
I felt like I was just throwing a dart at a person. I mean, I really, 1 second his arm's in front of me, the next second it's all the way across his body, and just to try to get that vein just seemed almost impossible.
Unable to make his IV stick, Walsh requests the pilot to smooth out the ride so he can complete his task.
Hey, pilot, could I have you find some clear airspace? Hostile territory. Fire coming in.
His request is denied. Instructors expect every student to perform an IV stick no matter the conditions. Ultimately, Walsh is unable to make the stick while the vehicle is moving.
Many times we'll be faced with treating a patient trying to perform medical skills in that cramped environment, which brings a lot more stress onto the student.
You're sweating, your glasses are fogging up, because it's hot in there, there's 5 or 6 other guys in there. When you're trying to get this IV stuck, and you just focus on the task at hand, and you just get it in there.
Night lanes finish, but there are 2 more trauma lane drills to give students more practice before their test. For Francis, it is more opportunity to improve his skills before final exams. But his problems continue.
Seems like every time they throw a scenario out there, it catches me a little bit off guard, you know? So I thought I was doing the right thing by taking care of the chest wounds, when really it was the blood that was coming from gunshot wounds to his cheeks, which he was bleeding into his airway. And I just let him pretty much drown in his blood. At this moment right now, I don't feel like I'm ready for the test, but by the time the test comes around, you know, it's you got to perform.
The long days of trauma lanes have worn the class down. A written final examination is a day away, but the rapid pace of training has left little time for men to study information they last covered 2 weeks ago.
Showtime 1400 tomorrow. Bring a dinner and a smile and some water. All right? Get out.
Yeah, everybody's stressed out. Everybody wants to pass, and it just gets, you know, it gets difficult. You're out there sweating all day long. You're tired of bending over. Your back is killing you. Your knees are killing you because you're always dealing like with a victim in the rocks underneath a truck, and you're just never comfortable.
When PJs go out, they're going to be fatigued, and they're going to be required to treat people and to save lives in that situation. So we're looking for that. We hope that they are fatigued.
The written test contains 100 questions covering over 700 pages of material. Brown and Houghton both failed this test in their last class. If they fail again, they could be dropped from the pararescue program.
We only have 1 chance left. We both, I think we were both a little overconfident. Last time we didn't really study as much as we should have.
It takes every bit of your effort and every bit of everyone else's effort in the team to help each other and help yourself through. So it requires a whole lot of time on your part, a whole lot of studying, a whole lot of concentration.
I'm pretty confident. I mean, that's the only way to get through things. You just gotta have the confidence to make it through each phase and not have a doubt in your mind. That's the only way you can do this whole thing.
After the test is over, there is nothing to do but wait.
100 questions from that much material, you gotta study a lot. You gotta really be prepared.
Walking the fence right now. Walking the fence is how I feel.
I'm sure you probably saw most of the men's faces in the exam room. I know I was one of them where I was looking down and I was like, you know, it's just...
Potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like 10 students could retest on Thursday. We'll see how the review goes.
To give the students every chance, instructors review the test questions and subject matter. to ensure they covered the material.
We'll sit down and we'll review all of the high miss questions. And by high miss, we mean 50% of the class or more missed it. If we feel that the question is worded unfairly or that it was covered confusingly, then we'll give credit for the question.
The numbers are six failed, so I'm thinking I'm one of them, but there's probably a lot of other guys that put themselves in that number too.
Yeah. Clear your desks. All right, here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna do a quick eyes on, let you see your score sheet. Look at your questions. I'll review the high miss onlys. If you have questions about particular questions, you come back from lunch. Throughout the rest of the day, you'll have to get with myself, and we'll address that question.
The test results are handed out. 6 men fail. Among them are Houghton and Francis.
It's ugly.
But Houghton is lucky. The instructor's test review disallows several questions which allow Houghton to pass. Francis is not so lucky. He fails outright.
Credit was given.
I changed like 3 of my answers, and those 3 were right. And I think I failed it by like 1 point after, or something like that.
Francis will have to take a retest, but first he and the others must take their trauma lane practical. Francis continues practicing the basics, knowing that is where he will win or lose the evaluation.
I've gone over in my head, tried not to overtrain last night, did a little bit of studying. My nerves are calm. Just gonna go in there and do what I know how to do.
In this final eval, each student is to perform a trauma assessment without assistance. They get 3 chances for an IV stick. They have 30 seconds to intubate their patient, clearing his air passage, and eliminate life threats. Francis performs smoothly. His patient survives. He passes. Houghton, however, is another story. He fails trauma lane evaluation and must take a retest. As a washback, he is down to his last chance once again.
I wish I could take back my words. Yesterday I said that I felt really confident that I would do good during my assessment. And today I got in there, just kind of drew a blank. Tomorrow I have 1 shot to go, and if I fail that, I'll be eliminated from the course. It's upsetting. It's definitely upsetting.
Aaron, look at me if you hear me.
Glass continues in his bid to pass every event.
Where does it hurt, Aaron?
As one of the most consistent performers in class, he cruises through his entire eval until it's time to make his IV stick.
Time limit for IVs.
Roger that.
By the time I went to start a line on the patient, I had my plan of action of every step that I was going to do for the next 5-10 minutes on this guy. And it ends up I took a little too much time starting the line. I didn't get it the first time, and by the time I was getting ready to start another IV stick, Sergeant Miller looked over me and said something along the lines of, "Sergeant Glass, do you have 30 seconds left? You failed." And that really hit me.
Glass's failure leaves him in disbelief. His failure shocks instructors and students alike.
The first thing that went through our mind is number 1 was the test anxiety, because sometimes that happens to some of our students. We were very shocked to see Glass didn't make it.
I passed the written test fine, studied hard for it all throughout the lanes, and then I went to go take my practical, and I failed. And it really shook me up. All it was an IV stick.
I felt like I was all over everything, man. I thought I had control of the whole situation.
For Houghton and Glass, the retest for trauma lane evaluation is their last chance to stay with the class.
Believe me. Knock that shit out, man.
I knew that my back was up against the wall, but then I was like, you know what, bring it. You know, the pressure's on, so bring a little more because I want to rise to the occasion.
Glass survives his retest by scoring a perfect 400 out of 400 points. Houghton passes his retest as well. A day later, Francis makes the grade on his written retest, and now 23 out of 28 students who began trauma lanes move on to their last class of paramedic training, cardiology.
When you're in a class and you grow stronger with a bunch of guys, and you get close, just like every school that you go through this whole pipeline, and unfortunately people are going to fall by the wayside. It's tough to watch people go.
But the failures are not over. One of the next to go is Francis, who fails his final cardiology exam. Francis is set back, but remains optimistic.
I have the utmost confidence that I will have no problem passing my test. I'm studying right now and I'm getting way ahead, and I've actually got a better understanding now than I ever did while I was in the course. That's all I'm focused on right now, is just making it through the paramedic course.
What Francis has to do to survive in this career field is hit the books, to sit there and read the books, to get prepared so that when he does come back, he can do a complete U-turn.
Glass, Brown, Houghton, and 18 other students now begin rotations. For the next 6 weeks, they will train side by side with experienced paramedic and emergency room staff in real-world life and death situations. It will give new meaning to the PJ motto, that others may live. 21 pararescue students begin their final chapter of the 6-month paramedic program in an actual real-world environment called rotations. Rotations are 6 weeks of working side by side with actual paramedic and emergency room hospital staff.
This is where we actually get hands-on, get out on the streets, get to, work with patients, live patients, real patients, and actually perform our skills that we've been training so hard for the last 4 months.
It's definitely a reality check when you get out there compared to the classroom. You get out there on your first call and you realize this is real life, this is the real deal.
I remember when I arrived here at Kirtland Air Force Base in August of 2003 with my wife, and I remember one of the first days as a casual student, I saw one of the students sporting this shirt. And I remember looking at someone and I was like, that's us. That's us. And I remember looking at someone and being like, wow, I'm gonna be there one day. I'm gonna be the guy in that shirt.
1, 2, 3. I got you.
The excitement quickly becomes reality as students average a 75-hour week. Training eager but nervous young men means instructors and medical supervisors must be patient, but never allow them to forget that a person's life could depend on split-second decisions.
There's very little room for error. You're always looked at under a microscope. Every little thing you do, even if you place an IV in the wrong position, if you're called upon by one of the nurses to administer some medications and you administer, half a cc too much, you're held accountable for everything that you do.
They're still under scrutiny even though they're not directly underneath our supervision 24 hours a day. We continuously have communications with the nurse directors and the department chairs of every site that we go to.
Each student works under the direction of a civilian preceptor who supervises his conduct at all times. The PJ student is allowed greater responsibility only as he earns it by his ability. Glass is under the supervision of 2 professional firefighters.
You're doing great.
They're both essentially teachers, and I'm the student. After every call, they let me know, hey, this is what you did really well, and this is what you need work on. What they're looking for me is they're looking for, 1, patient care. They're looking for empathy. They're looking to make sure that I'm not just there to get a pat on my back. They're also evaluating my leadership ability. Am I able to take charge of the scene? Am I able to recognize a problem and go with it? Gene, I know you don't want to go to the hospital, but I really think that's in your best interest. Because I don't want to leave here and have you get up and then have you fall maybe somewhere over there in the kitchen and hit your head. I don't want anything worse to happen to you, and then I don't want that to be on me, that I could have helped you and I didn't.
Now, Dave is very aggressive. He has very good people skills. And he's not afraid to get in there and do the job and make the patient feel comfortable. I think he's going to make a great paramedic.
For the firemen and women at Fire Station 13, Glass is popular and seen as a team player.
Yeah, we dig him. He cuts onions well, he rolls dough, and he does a very good job on scene with the patients.
Every student realizes immediately that their training has to be adapted to the realities of the street. In fact, adjusting their procedures to the situation is a primary lesson of paramedic training.
You're expecting this kind of patient with the information they give you prior to going out there to meet the patient. But you get out there, you assess your patient, and you find out it's something totally different.
We allow them to alter what we have taught them the moment they step out onto the street, because street medicine is totally different than book medicine. And you can ask any medic or any doctor or any nurse and they'll tell you the same exact thing.
If Trauma Lanes teaches students about keeping calm in simulated mass casualty scenarios, working with real victims requires true empathy. As Brown aids a victim of a car accident, applying a splint to her injured arm takes on a whole new meaning.
In trauma lanes, I just grab that thing, splint it up, and, the patient would scream, but not really scream, And this lady, you can see it in her face and in her expression when you touch it, that it hurt really bad. And so your hands become more gentle when you're out here in the streets with the public.
As these young men gain experience, they come face to face with what up to now has been only simulation. Rotations require them to work with children, teaching them that communication is more than controlling a situation. It becomes an exercise in how to listen.
Did you put any ice on it or anything? Yeah. You did? Okay.
Working with kids is really different.
How bad?
You gotta get to their level, you gotta talk to them, you gotta tell them, try to get them so they're not afraid of you.
I had a doctor ask me, he's like, so what do you think your most important textbook is? And I was like, well, this is a trick question. I don't know the answer. And he told me, your most important textbook is your patient, because each patient presents so differently and each situation is so much different than the other that you're always learning. And if you don't perform correctly, you could also possibly take their life instead of save it.
Jackie, can you please go to triage? Jackie, social worker, can you please go to triage?
The actual impact of a life and death struggle is not something that can be learned from trauma lanes. No one can ever be prepared for that, especially when it's an infant.
No drug allergies,
When I got in there, they'd already started CPR on the baby. They were breathing for it and doing chest compressions, and so everybody just assumed the roles and started doing their thing.
The infant has arrived at the ER. No breathing, no heartbeat. Dunn sees immediately that even the most seasoned professionals can be affected. But they must perform their job.
It's extremely chaotic in there. Like I said, people who have been doing it for 20 years, still get flustered in there. Because you're talking about a kid. It was a 3-month-old baby.
The child does not respond to CPR. The resuscitation team frantically attempts to get the baby's heart beating. But as seconds pass, the baby fails to respond.
Well, you feed off everyone else in the room. When you see pediatric surgeons in there, and they're getting flustered and they're trying to think about what they're doing. Of course, it's going to be 10 times worse for me, because that's the first time I've seen a kid in the code. So it's a little overwhelming.
Less than 15 minutes after the baby comes through the door, the infant's heart begins beating again, and then she begins breathing on her own. For Dunn, a combat veteran, the experience reinforces his commitment to helping others in need.
To save lives is much more rewarding, not only being able to eventually save a pilot that gets shot down or some rangers that get stuck behind enemy lines, but today I got to be part of bringing a 3-month-old baby back to life, so pretty rewarding.
But the joy of saving lives has a downside. Dealing with losing a patient can't be taught in training. For Brown, it is a sad lesson to learn.
These students have to realize that many of their patients simply won't make it, despite the students' best efforts.
The 5 weeks of rotations is a short period of time for pararescue trainees to experience the final lesson of realities of the paramedic job.
The patient was dead on arrival, so there was nothing we could do.
Patients die for a lot of reasons. For Brown, trained to overcome adversity, learning there are limits to his power to save lives is a tough lesson to accept.
Why? The note and everything.
I don't get it. Why?
Trained to be a PJ, our whole mission is to save lives, go out there and help people when they're hurt and injured. And when you come on scene and the guy's already dead on arrival, it really, lets your heart drop, and because there's not much you can do, you're helpless. And all the training, all the books you read, everything you do, you still can't help them.
Death is the final lesson to be learned in the paramedic program. It is the unfortunate consequence of the profession. But coping with death in the pararescue business requires an attitude that will allow a man to carry on in the face of any adversity.
You just kind of got to block it out and not let it get to you, or else, this whole job, will mess you up. You couldn't do it very long. Obviously, you just got to block it out and say that, there's some things that are just out of your control.
After 6 weeks, when paramedic street rotations end, 19 pararescue students are left after 6 months of study and toil. 10 others have been set back. But there will be no congratulations for the survivors. Like everything else in the pipeline, there is always another step to take.
We're basically going to tell them, good on you guys for going out and learning how to be a real paramedic. Now we have the National Registry exam to prepare for.
These 19 men will test for the National Registry for Paramedic Accreditation. The national passing rate for this exam is about 60%. The Pararescue Pipeline students have an 85% pass rate. The results of the PJ Paramedic program speak for themselves.
Sure. This paramedic program is definitely one of a kind. It's nothing like our civilian counterparts. You don't typically see paramedics that graduate 6 months after initiating a medical course. But we continuously get feedback that our students are a cut above any of the other programs around in the local area.
This course has done more than prepare students to pass a written test. It's trained them to save lives.
My confidence has built immensely. Like when we first saw trauma lanes, I mean, it was nerve-wracking coming here, not really knowing the checklist all that well, having to actually apply it and managing the patient, caring for the patient. You know, it was stressful. Now I feel like I could really go out there and save somebody's life.
Just the thought that you could bring somebody back to a loved one. And that's really, I think, what a lot of it is about right there.
There's not so much that affects me anymore. I can be cold and hungry and wet and not care about it because I've been there before.
Most of these students will now enter the final phase of their pipeline training, the 6-month Pararescue Apprentice course. It will be another demanding block of training.
Once they get done with the medical program, they go through the apprentice course, they learn how to do all the high-speed stuff of being a PJ, and then after that, like 2 to 3 weeks later, these guys are over there doing this for real.
Doing missions for real is every PJ's motivation for enduring the commitment that the pipeline demands. But being closer to the end than to the beginning is little comfort to students who know they still have a long way to go.
You're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel, then you realize that you haven't even got to the tunnel yet. There's so much more left, so much more time that you gotta commit to this. You think you feel like you need to be rewarded for what you've accomplished so far, but I don't want my reward until it's all over.
There are times where I look ahead and say, all right, man, I'm almost there, but then you take a step back and you're like, okay, I have to look at what's going on now and what's gonna happen next week. And you can't plan too far ahead because you never know when you're gonna have a slip up or when something's gonna go wrong or not work out for you.
Pararescue offers no guarantees, only challenges and a commitment to helping others. It's a job requiring strength and honor so that others may live.